Welcome to Building with, Not For, a case study in transparency. I am Jazmin Tanner, or Jazz, and I'm a lead product manager at the Wikimedia Foundation. I will start by saying that I am a process person turned product person. A process turned product person with a passion for making systems just, equitable, and transparent. It's these values that drew me to the Wikimedia Foundation in the first place. I wanted to be a part of the nonprofit with a vision where everyone, everywhere, has access to freely share in the sum of all knowledge. And I wanted to dedicate myself full time to making that vision a reality by centering diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. In my early years at the foundation as a technical program manager, I became familiar with the breadth of 13 Wikimedia projects spanning 300 languages, edited by hundreds of thousands of unpaid volunteers all over the world. These volunteers are dedicated to making knowledge available to everyone everywhere. At the same time, I got to know actual Wikimedia movement leaders, the volunteers who lead the creation and curation of content on projects like Wikipedia, and the host of barriers they face while doing this important work. I also discovered how challenging it is to ensure our products represent the nuances of different geographical contexts and cultures across languages. I read about and witnessed the biases that exist in our projects, and I was inspired to learn what some volunteers were doing to combat them. For example, Just Wade, who tries to combat the gender bias on Wikipedia of roughly 80% of biographies on English being of men by adding women scientists, something that has been at times met with resistance. Although these are certainly challenges, I also saw opportunity. Just isn't alone in wanting to combat this bias. There are several initiatives and champions who want to make the Wikimedia movement and projects more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. But when we set out on this journey, there was no model to connect these efforts and ensure their consistency or standardize the way we assess their impact. We were missing a standard cohesive framework that included concrete resources and examples of how we build technology powering the Wikimedia movement, and which ensured the foundation product and technology teams check for potential bias at each step in the software development cycle. Not only was there no framework at the Wikimedia Foundation, it was also nearly impossible to find a detailed DEI-centered software development framework outside of the organization with concrete steps for open source environments. So I had the opportunity of being a part of a working group that created one. We at the Wikimedia Foundation have a fundamental belief that organizations, especially those working in open source environments, should publicly share their software development process models so that we can all continue to learn from each other in a proactive way. Although our framework is still a work in progress, we hold ourselves to the same standard. To that end, today, I want to share the lessons learned from starting this journey. We are nowhere near finished, but we have at least 10 lessons you see on this slide. Before we dive in, I want to define framework. When we talk about the framework, we're referring to three things: a shared set of principles that will guide decision-making, a shared process that extends what we already do to account for intentional phases and checkpoints along the way, and a set of shared tools that every team can use to activate the process within their own context. In June 2020, during the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, I felt a greater sense of urgency to share a deck and summary paper I created. My goal was to unify and elevate efforts of many across the movement to ensure our development teams had access to resources for checking their bias and ensuring transparent intersectional and contextual practices. One of the early reviewers of the unification deck and paper was my then manager, Grace Gellerman. Grace was in favor of publicly sharing these resources for community input and encouraged me to meet with Carol Dunn, the Vice President of Product, for the work to have higher visibility. Around this time, the former executive director and COO made a public statement that the Wikimedia Foundation stands for racial justice and is committed to breaking down the barriers that prevent people from accessing and contributing to knowledge. They also pledged to include deliberate pro-inclusion commitments into our development lifecycle, including from user research, product and feature design choices, development, training, and application of machine learning algorithms. Essentially, they gave us the runway to prioritize making our product development process more diverse, equitable, and inclusive at each point, which was important for ensuring it was okay for teams to invest the time and resources necessary to build with intention. Additionally, our product leadership released a strategy that prioritized knowledge equity and knowledge as a service, and those elements gave teams a clear directive. Once Carol saw the deck and white paper, she suggested pulling inspiration from it to form a working group. The multidisciplinary and cross-departmental working group made up of leadership and individual contributors was charged with serving as the stewards to creating an inclusive product development framework for the Wikimedia product and technology teams. 2, start with research and then share insights early for feedback. It can be tempting to jump right in with solutions and anecdotes when developing a framework or even when doing product development work in general. However, please still steer clear of attempting to put forward a one-size-fits-all approach. No matter the eagerness to implement this work, it cannot be impactful without doing the work up front and understanding the context in which you are working in. Our working group started by establishing a baseline and conducting a deeply comprehensive review of existing best practices, or as we call them, bright spots, and areas of improvement. The working group interviewed 15 software development teams with different focuses. We also researched best practices for inclusive product development, as well as the opportunities and pitfalls of software development teams at other technology companies. We had roughly 60 people across product and tech respond to a survey, even if they weren't a part of the interviewed teams. This data helped to establish our baseline. 3, unlock the next steps by sharing insights early and really listening to reactions. We share the initial insights first in a product salon, which is a meeting of product managers at the foundation, and then in our all staff meeting so that we could have a cross-departmental pollination. It was helpful to have perspectives across functions when sharing and receiving information. Here's one of the slides from that share out. There were so many bright spots, but I'm just going to touch on a few. So we heard that there was a team that changed its process from one where they chose large projects like Wikidata, Wikipedia, or Commons, and was intentional in focusing on the smaller projects like Wikisource and Wiktionary. As a result, Wikisource had a huge impact on content creation for Indic languages. Another example was a team that often evaluated what features should be available in offline mode and for older variable devices. Research was a big pain point, especially the nuance and context of selecting and communicating with segments of users and evaluating the trade-off as a result. Remember, there are 13 wiki projects across 300 languages. Even within one language, there are different regional contexts. For example, users in Nigeria can develop content on Yoruba or Igbo Wikipedia, but we also see them editing on English Wikipedia to expand content about Nigeria. And in the context of Hindi Wikipedia, it is a medium-sized and growing wiki, and so we see it as a growth wiki, but there is also gender bias on this wiki that we have to consider. You will see some of the same things that were bright spots for one team were areas of improvement for another. While over 80% of our survey respondents stated they felt they had a good understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion, there were also many free text responses that called out a lack of shared language about what we meant when we said DEI, especially country to country. With this in mind, something that occurred often throughout the process was people wanting our working group to define and debate the concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion within a global context. It can be tempting to answer requests of defining diversity, equity, and inclusion and touch on philosophical and theoretical concepts. However, as product and technology people, it is our job to leave those aspects of the work to people who specialize in that area. We should instead focus on the product development side of the work and the application of those definitions set by those experts, which is why the fourth lesson is, if possible, draw on the expertise of DEI professionals. Our global DEI team, with a lot of input from other people across the organization, put forth a shared definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Something that was helpful was the line about individuals not being diverse, but groups being diverse, which returns us to the concept of context. Recognizing and sharing our identities, where we see differences and similarities, especially when starting this work, really helps to identify some of the possible biases and unique perspectives the group should be mindful of or even leverage. As mentioned, our product strategy emphasizes knowledge equity. This means we have permission to focus on evaluating content and editors who are not a part of our established market and face structural barriers to participate. And as stated here, in order to ensure we are inclusive, we must take intentional steps to meaningfully include those who have been excluded at each step in our decision-making process. This framework aims to codify this. After we collected feedback on our research from others in the foundation and had grounding with a shared definition, we worked with a design expert to tease apart the findings and provide shared insights and opportunities based on overarching themes and tensions. We were able to identify 6 categories: process, tools, talent, structure, incentives, and strategy. With these organized findings and inspiration from industry leaders, the double diamond and agile methodologies, we were positioned to develop the first draft of our inclusive product development playbook. The playbook aimed to start with the process category, while the product platform strategy set by product leadership provided the guardrails for setting equity strategy goals. Before putting the playbook into practice, we shared it with key constituency, our Wikimedia volunteer community. At our annual Wikimedia conference in 2021, the working group presented the draft playbook and framework. We shared our intentions for inclusive product development to get feedback from the community on what to include and what we should iterate on. Here's one of the key slides from that presentation, and it shows the unique diagram we developed that provided a visual representation of each phase of the playbook and our development process. As you can see, our group also evolved a bit more during that time, adding more representation from technology and embedding more members of the global DEI team. Following the presentation at Wikimedia, we joined a virtual discussion of prospective opportunities and challenges from the community's perspective. For example, organizers of smaller projects, languages, and user groups wanted to ensure we engaged with them and we didn't overwhelm them or inundate them with research questions. This was a consideration we added in our playbook. During the meeting, we also shared ways in which people could work with us as we continue on this journey, which included the creation of a media wiki page to watch for regular updates and engagement on our talk pages, which is a communication tool. In open source projects, it's important to engage impacted and interested parties at every step of the process. Even if it slows us down, we don't see this as any different for us. It was important to test our draft playbook and toolkit with a smaller group of teams before rolling it out to everyone. In October 2021, 7 beta teams at varying phases in their development lifecycle agreed to adopt the playbook and for at least one stage of their development, attempt to complete each task in the framework and provide feedback on obstacles, successes, and learnings. The 7 teams who are still in the process of finalizing testing of the playbook include front-end teams and 1 back-end team serving desktop and mobile users. Our goal with the beta teams was to foster an atmosphere of mutual learning and support. We made it clear we knew where we wanted to go, but needed to work collectively to figure out how to get there. We held monthly meetings for teams to exchange feedback and for our group to learn and unblock what we could. We also wanted to create a safe space for making mistakes and build out artifacts for future teams as we learn. For example, we created a FAQ document to help with common questions we heard in meetings. Additionally, we created an open Slack channel that non-beta teams could join and reference when it is their turn to incorporate the playbook into their practices. The scope of this beta group focused on teams that had product managers that could help drive the work with their dedicated support working group member. Here's a sample of pages from the playbook structured as a checklist. The required activities are things we expect the team to do at each phase of their work. There's also additional suggested activities. If teams couldn't complete a step, we asked that they note what barrier they encountered, and if they were able to accomplish it, we asked them to share the impact or output of completing the step. The items in black are standard product development practices, and the items in blue indicate new practices we're putting in place to ensure more inclusive and equitable outcomes. Here's an example of supplementary materials we shared, like a pre-mortem toolkit that helps teams evaluate risks and failure cases for their strategy and partnership with impacted stakeholders before they move on to discovery. Our communities are so diverse and complex, it is important to understand how a product decision for one audience may impact another. The working group was responsible for the process and resources to ensure our software development lifecycle promotes DEI. As part of this, it was important for us to not be anecdotal or provide made-up benchmark numbers without understanding the context of each team's available metric capabilities and relevant platform audiences. It was for this reason we encouraged every test team to start by establishing their own baseline. And then also consider pragmatically where there was potential for growth. To highlight the importance of allowing teams to establish their own baseline, I want to share about the Wikipedia apps. I know this intimately as the product manager of Android. Here you have the top 3 countries where we saw downloads of the Android app, which were Germany, the US, and India. Conversely, for the iOS app, the top 3 highest download or countries for downloads were the US by a much more significant margin when compared to Android, followed by China, which is notable because Wikipedia is actually blocked in China, and then Turkey. India is much further down the list, and China was not on the list for Android as far as our top 10 downloadable countries. So as you can see, it is really important for teams to establish their own equity goals based on their context. Delving further, at first glance, it appears most edits on Android in 2020 were from English Wikipedia. Assumptions were made that it was largely from North American editors, and there was concern at how disproportionate edits from Germany and Indic languages compared to edits on English. However, for the first time, we dissected this by country and language, which gave a better picture and allow us to learn more about who shows up on which language wikis. We use our data coupled with industry information of possible reach with research papers written about wiki communities to define our target audiences. We chose English Wikipedia editors in India and Nigeria to diversify regional content on English. We chose, in particular, Nigeria because we noticed a spike in downloads in 2019 and learned a lot of their edits were going to English Wikipedia. We chose Morocco, Egypt, DR Congo, and Mali for similar reasons to diversify regional content on medium to large language wikis, and there was potential based on what we saw for article page views. For our qualitative research, we specifically wanted to engage low vision users in India based on the high downloads of the app coming from the country and industry research indicating a high population of people being visually impaired in India. With so many downloads coming from India and Hindi Wikipedia being a growth language for our organization, we wanted to see how we could contribute to the growth of this language Wikipedia by building tools specifically for Hindi speakers and other users that would find those tools useful. We knew that Japanese Wikipedia had a high proportion of women editors comparative to other wikis. We made this language a priority language for gender equity purposes and because our data indicated a presence of these users via downloads and edits. This segmentation also proved to be helpful for our quantitative work. We ran an ABC test to determine what icons should represent notifications in the app. As you can see, depending on your group, there were noticeable differences in preferences between our existing More option, a bell icon, or the inbox icon. We paired this data with qualitative data, and it let us know that users thought the inbox icon was more for messages and the bell icon was for notifications. Although the inbox had a higher click rate, we wanted to be honest about what the user would see, so we chose the bell icon as it was an improvement from More. We also learned during that time through focused usability testing that Japanese characters resulted in performance issues on our communication platform when a user attempted to post a comment, which made sense when we saw a discrepancy of how often Japanese Wikipedia editors use our communication platform relative to other user groups. This information allowed us to look into changing the API we use for posting comments. we wouldn't have discovered these differences without being really deliberate in how we test, even though it is a larger investment of time and resources than the team was historically used to. As our VP of Product, Carol Dunn, puts it, asking when the framework and a team's adoption of it is done is akin to asking, when will I be done being healthy? Everyone's health is contextual to their own body at a given point in time, and rituals of being healthy evolves as your body changes and grows. We see building inclusively the same way. There is always more to do, not just at a team level, but as an organization and movement as well. As we learn more, we will adapt accordingly. Adaptation will take the form of the artifacts we produce, who serves in the working group, what our processes are for soliciting feedback, and other ways that may not be apparent to us at this moment. It can be enticing to look for concrete answers that can be broadly applied, but inclusive product development requires adaptability. Share the journey, the final lesson. Everything that I shared here is available on our Media Wiki page that anyone can feel free to access at any time. You will also be able to see where we are currently in our process and what our next steps are. I truly want to thank you, Women in Product, for the opportunity to share this journey. Feedback is a gift, and I welcome it in the Q&A section that comes next. Before we shift to that, I want to encourage more open source organizations to take similar steps or share their existing work in this area with templates, successes, and failures so we can learn from each other. It is our collective responsibility to ensure these DEI-centered practices and learnings are accessible to all. I stand on the shoulders of giants, and sharing also means sharing who you collaborate with and are inspired by. And these are the people that I want to thank for those things. Thank you.